Chametz versus Matzah, Pesach 5781. The words chametz and matzah are almost identical. Chametz is spelled chet, mem, tzadi, tzofi. Matzah is mem, tzadi, hey. There's only one difference. Chametz has a chet, matzah has a hey. The rabbis teach us this is significant. The hay here, the space in the hay here is an escape valve, which lets the matzah cool down and not puff up, not leaven. On the other hand, the chametz doesn't have that. So what happens? It becomes puffed up and becomes leavened bread. The rabbis teach that we're to be like matzah. We're not to puff up and become arrogant like that leavened bread. We're to be low and humble like the matzah and let our arrogance escape here. Much of the Pesach story is really a polemic against arrogance. Look at Paro, the villain. He's arrogant. He thinks he's the sun god Ra, and he controls nature. God, of course, teaches him with the plagues he does not control nature. It's God, the God of Israel, who controls nature. God plagues the Nile River, which was believed to be a deity and was the life source for the Egyptians. The overflowing of the Nile was of tremendous economic benefit to them, agricultural benefit. But God simply isn't showing that he's more powerful than Paro and could defeat Paro by controlling nature where Paro no longer can. What he's showing is he's going to use his power for good, for moral purposes, unlike Paro, who uses it to oppress the weak. Think again about the plaguing of the Nile River. There's another reason why God plagues the Nile. It was the Nile the Egyptians used to kill the Hebrew babies. So God is saying, you used the water source to kill instead of to give life. Water should be to preserve life. You used it to kill. Now I'm going to plague that very source. And of course, it comes full circle in the 10th plague, Makot B'chorot, which just as Hebrews were killed, now Egyptians will be killed in Makot B'chorot, the plague of the firstborn. The Egyptian grandeur is mocked as well. Think about all the elaborate Egyptian buildings. What wreaks havoc on the Egyptians? Kinim, lice, these little bugs you can't even see, but yet they wreak havoc on the Mitzrayim. In the 9th plague, God directly attacks Paro. Paro's the sun god. God brings the plague of Choshech, darkness. I'm going to turn off a switch, Paro, and you're simply going to disappear. You're going to be eclipsed. No light, total darkness in your land. The great Egyptian weapons, the chariots, are also mocked. The chariots were like the nuclear weapons of the day. And of course, the Egyptians pursue Bnei Israel as the sea is split. But what happens to these mighty chariots? They get stuck in the mud. And as the Egyptians are trying, of course, to free these chariots, these valuable weapons, they realize, or they don't realize, that the wind, which split the sea, had stopped blowing, and the Egyptian soldiers and these valuable chariots are all washed away, totally useless against God's wind. Now, I should point out as an aside, and I want to give credit here to Joel Chodas, who brought this to my attention and made the connection, that recently a ship was stuck in the Suez Canal. They brought out tugboats to try to free the ship. They couldn't free it because the water had become too shallow because of the tide. What freed the ship? Not any human intervention. The full moon of Nisan, that Pesach moon, freed the ship as the tide rose and the ship was able to start sailing again. It reminds us of God's power and that Pesach happens again as we as a people and as individuals are repeatedly saved by God. Now, we should note that there were those in Egypt who understood that Paro was not the ultimate power. Ironically, that was Paro's own daughter, Bat Paro. According to the Talmud, when she was going to save the baby, of course, Moshe, she was actually going to convert. She wanted to become a member of Bnei Yisrael. And according to the Talmud, what was the Hebrew name she took? Bacha, which means the daughter of God. Yah being short for Yud He Vav He. She's the daughter no longer of Paro, the arrogant enslaver, but the daughter of the God of Israel who frees. As she's freeing, she's saving this poor baby who was condemned to die, and she saves him. She embraces that morality which her father rejected. And let's look at the child Moshe, who she saved. We're told later on, V'ha'ish Moshe anav ma'od. And the man Moses was very humble. Notice, first of all, he's described as a man. He doesn't consider himself to be a deity, unlike Paro. He's a man, and not only that, he's humble. Now, when we think about humble people, unfortunately, sometimes we think about people who are meek, who are a nebech, we'll say, a pity, little pathetic type of person here. Let me ask you this. Was Bat Paro, was Pharaoh's daughter weak? No. She was courageous. She had a lot of moral courage. Again, according to the Talmud, when she was going to save the baby, her maidservants were saying, "Your father, Paro, the king, has decreed these children die. You can't undermine him and save the baby." She had the courage to do what was right and save the baby. Let's look at the son she saved, Moshe. Was he weak? No. He defeated the most powerful man in the world, Paro, hardly a weak individual. Humble, yes. Weak, no. The message here is humility is not weakness. We should have the strength to realize our limitations, that we're not God. And with that understanding, what we should do is we should liberate others and continue God's work of liberation. Humility means having the strength and the courage to help raise up others.